While millions of people are screaming at their televisions, painting their faces, and letting their mood collapse because 11 strangers lost a game, there is a large and quiet group of people who feel almost nothing at all. No anger, no excitement, no emotional whiplash, just indifference. And according to psychology and neuroscience, that indifference isn't laziness, arrogance, or lack of passion. It may be the result of a fundamentally different way the brain processes meaning, reward, and identity. Stay with me because understanding this will completely change how you see people who don't care about sports, and maybe how you see yourself. Here's the part nobody talks about. Not obsessing over sports doesn't make you boring. It doesn't mean you lack loyalty, and it definitely doesn't mean something is wrong with you. But it does mean that your brain is responding differently than the majority of people around you. Without constant external influence, their internal voice grows clearer. This is why some older men appear calmer and more grounded after they disconnect. They are no longer living in reaction mode. But there is another side that rarely gets discussed. Human beings are wired for connection, even those who value solitude. When isolation is chosen consciously, it can be healthy. When it becomes permanent avoidance, it quietly erodes emotional flexibility. Some men become so protective of their peace that they stop allowing anyone close enough to challenge or support them. Psychologically, this creates emotional rigidity. They feel stable, but unreachable. Women often struggle to understand this phase. Many interpret the withdrawal personally. Others see it as punishment. In reality, most senior men are not withdrawing from women. They are withdrawing from emotional unpredictability. They are done navigating mixed signals, power struggles, constant emotional negotiation. If someone brings calm, respect, and consistency, many older men remain open. If they bring drama, testing, or entitlement, the door closes quietly and permanently. Another important shift after 60 is how men view conflict. Younger men often see conflict as something to solve. Older men increasingly see it as something to avoid, not out of weakness, but out of awareness. Stress affects sleep, blood pressure, heart health. Senior men understand the cost. Cutting people off becomes a health decision as much as an emotional one. There is also the issue of trust. Many senior men have trusted deeply and paid for it. Betrayal feels heavier later in life because there is less time to recover. When trust is broken after 60, many men don't rebuild it. They withdraw. Studies consistently show that a large percentage of adults, especially in countries like the United States, are emotionally invested in sports teams. They organize their schedules around games. Their mood rises and falls with wins and losses. Their language even changes. We won, we lost. So the real question isn't why so many people care, it's why some people don't. To understand that, you have to understand how deeply human beings are wired for tribes. For most of human history, survival depended on belonging. Being part of a group meant protection, shared resources, and safety. Your brain evolved to reward anything that reinforced group identity. Modern life doesn't require tribes in the same way anymore, but the wiring never disappeared. Sports stepped in to fill that gap. Teams became symbols, colors became flags, rivalries became borders. When someone watches their team play, their brain doesn't experience it as casual entertainment. It experiences it as participation in a collective identity. Neuroscience shows that during games, sports fans release oxytocin, the same bonding hormone involved in close relationships. Their nervous system reacts as if they are emotionally connected to the outcome. The brain isn't rational about this. It doesn't care that the players are strangers. It doesn't care that the outcome has no direct impact on daily life. It only cares that this feels like us versus them. But here's where the divergence begins. People who don't obsess over sports often show lower sensitivity to this kind of tribal activation. Their identity is less dependent on external group symbols. They are more likely to define themselves internally rather than collectively. Instead of asking, "Where do I belong?" they ask, "What actually matters to me?" Psychologists describe this as lower tribal orientation and higher individual coherence. In simple terms, these people don't need to attach their sense of self to a group victory to feel whole. They don't experience the same emotional pull towards symbolic competition. And that difference shows up early. Research has found that people with low interest in spectator sports engage in less us versus them thinking overall. They're less likely to instinctively dislike opposing groups, less likely to feel threatened by rivalry, less likely to confuse identity with affiliation. But the difference doesn't stop there, because what happens in the brain of a sports fanatic during a game is more intense and more chemically powerful than most people realize. Every play triggers anticipation. Every near miss spikes tension. Every win releases dopamine. Dopamine isn't the pleasure chemical, it's the wanting chemical. It's what keeps you engaged, focused, and craving the next moment. Sports fandom creates a constant loop of anticipation and uncertainty. You don't know what will happen next, and that unpredictability is exactly what keeps the brain hooked. This is called intermittent reinforcement, the same reward pattern used by slot machines and gambling systems. The brain learns that staying engaged might pay off. People who don't care about sports simply don't get that dopamine hit from vicarious competition. Their reward system isn't triggered by watching others win or lose. And that might not be a choice at all. Genetic research suggests that variations in dopamine receptor sensitivity can influence how strongly someone responds to competitive spectator activities. In other words, indifference to sports may be partially biological. Your lack of emotional reaction isn't apathy, it's alignment. And this sets the stage for a deeper psychological difference, one that explains why sports fans and non-sports people often talk past each other without realizing it. To really understand why some people don't obsess over sports, you have to look at how meaning is created inside the brain. For sports fans, meaning is often externalized. It lives in scores, in standings, in championships, in moments they didn't directly create but emotionally inhabit. When their team wins, the brain registers it as personal success. When the team loses, the loss feels personal too. Psychologists call this basking in reflected glory. Notice the language: we won, we lost. That pronoun shift is not accidental. It's the brain folding an external event into the self-concept. People who don't obsess over sports rarely do this. Their sense of self is more internally anchored. They don't borrow identity from outcomes they can't influence. As a result, their self-esteem tends to be more stable. It doesn't spike with victories, it doesn't crash with losses. And that stability changes how they experience emotion. Sports fans often experience intense emotional highs and lows because their reward system is constantly being activated and disrupted. Non-sports people experience fewer spikes, but also fewer crashes. This is why indifference to sports is often misread as emotional flatness. It isn't flatness, it's regulation. There's another layer to this difference that often gets overlooked: empathy. Interestingly, research shows that sports fans often score higher on certain types of empathy. They practice caring deeply about other people's struggles, athletes they've never met, because those struggles are symbolically tied to their identity. So why don't non-sports people feel that same empathy toward athletes? It's not because they lack empathy, it's because of empathy allocation. Every human being has a limited emotional bandwidth. Caring deeply about one thing means caring less about something else. People who don't care about sports often direct their empathy elsewhere, toward personal relationships, toward creative work, toward ideas, causes, and inner experiences. Studies have found that people with low interest in sports tend to score higher in openness to experience. They're more drawn to art, beauty, philosophy, and abstract thinking. They seek emotional depth in places that don't involve competition. They get their meaning from exploration rather than victory, from understanding rather than winning, from creation rather than domination. Their brains are chasing the same reward as sports fans: connection, transcendence, significance. They're just finding it through different channels. And sometimes indifference to sports isn't purely neurological. For some people, it's protective. They may have felt excluded by sports culture growing up, bullied in gym class, alienated by hyper-competitiveness. Over time, detachment became safety. But even when there's a backstory, indifference doesn't equal deficiency. Sometimes it simply means the narrative doesn't resonate. Sports fans often find meaning in dramatic arcs: the underdog story, the comeback, the rivalry. For non-sports people, that randomness feels hollow. They ask a different question: why invest emotionally in outcomes I can't influence, performed by people I don't know, and games that don't meaningfully affect my life? And they're not wrong, but neither are sports fans. These are two different strategies for meeting the same psychological need. One group finds story in competition, the other finds story in experience. One finds meaning by watching, the other by participating. This difference becomes even clearer when psychologists distinguish between parasocial investment and direct engagement. Sports fandom is largely parasocial. It's emotional investment without reciprocity. Non-sports people often prefer environments where their attention changes outcomes, where effort has direct impact. They want to be inside the experience, not observing it from the outside. And that preference quietly reshapes how they spend their time, attention, and emotional energy. Psychologists who study optimal experience often talk about something called flow. Those moments when attention locks in, when time dissolves, when the mind stops wandering and becomes fully absorbed. Sports fans experience flow by watching, by tracking every move, every play, every shift in momentum. For their brains, attention is pulled outward and sustained by uncertainty. But people who don't obsess over sports tend to enter flow differently. Their absorption is usually self-generated. They find it in reading, in writing, in building something, in solving problems, in creating meaning rather than witnessing it. This is a critical distinction, because flow created through direct engagement feels fundamentally different from flow created through observation. One is participatory, the other is vicarious. People who don't care about sports often report feeling more present in their own lives. They aren't spending hours emotionally invested in someone else's struggle. They're engaged in their own. There's something quietly radical about that. While others organize their weekends around televised events, non-sports people are often organizing their inner world. They're thinking, reflecting, exploring ideas, following curiosity without a scoreboard. This doesn't mean they lack intensity. It means their intensity points inward. They still experience emotional highs, but those highs are slower, deeper, and less dependent on external outcomes. They don't need constant stimulation to feel alive. And this is where misunderstanding often arises. In a culture that celebrates visible excitement, loud passion, and shared spectacle, quiet engagement can look like disengagement. Stillness is mistaken for apathy, silence for emptiness, detachment for lack of feeling. But neuroscience suggests the opposite. Many people who don't care about sports have nervous systems that are more sensitive to overstimulation. Crowds drain them. Noise exhausts them. Constant emotional fluctuation feels invasive. Their brains are wired to seek depth over frequency, meaning over momentum. This is why watching sports, which combines noise, unpredictability, emotional spikes, and tribal tension, can feel overwhelming rather than enjoyable. It's not boring to them, it's dysregulating. So they opt out, not because they lack passion, but because their passion lives elsewhere. And once you understand that, a lot of judgment falls apart. Non-sports people aren't rejecting culture, they're curating it. They aren't avoiding emotion, they're choosing where emotion actually nourishes them. This is also why debates between sports fans and non-fans often go nowhere. They're not arguing about entertainment, they're arguing about how meaning should be experienced. One group feels alive through shared narrative and collective tension. The other feels alive through autonomy, focus, and internal coherence. Both are valid, but they are not interchangeable. And when society treats one as default and the other as deviant, people who don't care about sports often grow up feeling subtly out of place. Not wrong, just misaligned. That misalignment can feel lonely or freeing, depending on whether you understand it. So what does all of this actually mean? It means that if you don't care about sports, you're not missing some essential human experience. You're not broken, you're not boring, and you're not emotionally deficient. You're simply wired differently. Your brain's reward system isn't activated by vicarious competition. Your sense of identity isn't tied to group victories. Your emotional highs don't depend on outcomes you can't influence. Instead, your meaning comes from engagement, not spectatorship, from depth, not drama, from presence, not performance. That doesn't make you superior, and it doesn't make sports fans inferior. It means you're playing a different psychological game, one that values autonomy over allegiance, consistency over volatility, internal coherence over external validation. The tension between sports fans and non-sports people has never really been about taste. It's about where meaning lives. For one group, meaning emerges through shared narratives, rivalries, and collective emotion. For the other, meaning emerges through lived experience, personal challenge, and internal growth. Both satisfy the same human needs, they just take different routes. So the next time someone looks at you strangely and asks, "Did you see the game?" and you genuinely couldn't care less, remember this: you're not opting out of life. You're opting into a version of it where your attention is spent where it actually matters to you. You're not disconnected, you're selectively connected. And in a world that constantly demands your attention, your outrage, your allegiance, and your emotional energy, that quiet selectivity might be your biggest advantage. If this resonated with you, you'll probably understand why quiet people process the world differently, why they often think more deeply, and why that difference is so often misunderstood. Click one of these videos to explore how your mind works when you stop playing the same game as everyone else.